I was reading some of Jasher, and I want to read some more later, but first I'm going to read from the Bible. It's in Genesis chapter 39, and this is about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. So Jasher talks about it, but it is a lot more detailed. But I want to give an idea of what the Bible says, and you can always use your own discernment. Pray for, discernment by the Holy Spirit when you listen to anything. I'm not trying to change your opinion on anything, but I just wanted to discuss it, what my thoughts are. Chapter 1, Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And Yahweh was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that Yahweh was with him, and that Yahweh made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of the house, and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that Yahweh blessed the Egyptian's house, for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of Yahweh was upon all that he had in his house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness, and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, and he hearkened not unto her, to lie by her, or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time, that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men in the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. I think Joseph is a picture of Christ. And his brothers sold him. This was the tribe of Judah. They sold him like the Jewish people, just let him be when Jesus came. He got sold for pieces of silver, right? And then he died at their hand. So this is very similar when his brothers sold him off to be a slave. And when Joseph goes into this house, Potiphar's house, it's like Potiphar would be representative of Yahweh, and Joseph would be representative of Jesus on earth. And Yahweh gave Jesus control over everything on earth. This is originally also what it was supposed to be for Adam. Yahweh originally said Adam could have control over everything on earth, but Jesus had to come because Adam sinned and everything. But they were told not to do one thing, pretty much. They were told you have to love your God with all your heart and not go after other gods. And I think that this story is representative of Jesus coming and being tempted by the devil, where Potiphar's wife is tempting Joseph to have sex with her. So Jesus was tempted to, do stuff with the devil, obviously, not in the same way, but he was tempted away, and he stood his ground, and he didn't even look at temptation. And in the same way, Joseph wouldn't even look at Potiphar's wife. That's from Jasher. He wouldn't look at her face. He only looked at the ground. And so that's, when we're tempted by something, that we're not supposed to even look at it. And so anyway, I think that, he's saying that, God has given him everything, where Potiphar had given Joseph everything in the house to be his. There was only one thing he couldn't have, Potiphar's wife. And Joseph was obedient to Potiphar. And in the same way, Jesus was obedient to God and never got tempted away. In the same way, we are supposed to be obedient to God and not get tempted away. So this is a very interesting symbolic representation of that, I think. All right, so I'm going to read from Jasher, and I have the book Enoch, Jubilees, Jasher, banned from the Bible by Joseph Lumpkin. But I will share on the screen a different translation, and you can check them both out. I just thought this part was interesting in Jasher chapter 43, verse 41. So I'm going to start with that. And Joseph's brothers went back to his father, and they told him that he, they implied that he got eaten, devoured by an animal. And so Jacob told them all to go out and go hunt the beasts out there, and so that he could slay the beast that killed his son, because he was, Jacob was distraught. So I'll start here with verse 41. And Jacob took the beast from the hands of his sons, and he cried out with a loud and weeping voice, holding the beast in his hand. And he spoke with a bitter heart to the beast. Why did you devour my son Joseph? And how did you have no fear of the God of the earth, or of my trouble for my son Joseph? You did devour my son for nothing. He committed no violence. I was responsible for him. God will require him that is persecuted. And Yahweh opened the mouth of the beast in order to comfort Jacob with its words. And it answered Jacob and spoke these words to him. As God lives, who created us in the earth, and as your soul lives, my Lord, I did not see your son, neither did I tear him to pieces. But from a distant land I also came to seek my son, who went from me this day, and I know not whether he is living or dead. And I came this day into the field to seek my son, and your sons found me, and seized me, and increased my grief, and have this day brought me before you, and I have now spoken all my words to you. Now therefore, O Son of Man, I am in your hands, and do to me this day as it may seem good in your sight, but by the life of God who created me, I did not see your son, nor did I tear him to pieces, neither has the flesh of man entered my mouth all the days of my life. When Jacob heard the words of the beast, he was greatly astonished, and sent forth the beast from his hand, and she went her way. And Jacob was still crying aloud and weeping for Joseph day after day, and he mourned his son many days. I just thought that was interesting that the wolf started speaking to him. I like that the life of God who created me. I actually think that when we're, on the new earth and everything, and the animals all everything's new, I believe the animals are going to talk. And there's instances in the Bible where, the donkey talks and stuff, so it's very interesting to me. All right, chapter 44, I'm going to skip down to verse 11. Potiphar took Joseph and brought him to his house that he might serve him. And Joseph found favor in the sight of Potiphar. He placed confidence in him and made him overseer of his house. And all that belonged to him he delivered over unto his hand. And Yahweh was with Joseph, and he became a prosperous man. The Lord blessed the house of Potiphar for the sake of Joseph. And Potiphar left all that he had in the hands of Joseph, and Joseph was one that caused things to come in and go out, and everything was regulated by his wish in the house of Potiphar. And Joseph was 18 years old, a youth with beautiful eyes and of very good appearance, and no one was like him in all the land of Egypt. At that time, while he was in his master's house, going in and out of the house and attending his master, Zelicah, his master's wife, lifted up her eyes toward Joseph, and she looked at him, and behold, he was a youth handsome and well favored, and she coveted his beauty in her heart. And her soul was fixed on Joseph, and she enticed him day after day. And Zelicah persuaded Joseph daily, but Joseph did not lift up his eyes to give attention to his master's wife. And Zelicah said to him, How goodly are your appearance and form! Truly I have looked at all the slaves, and have not seen so beautiful a slave as you are. Joseph said to her, Certainly he who created me in my mother's womb created all mankind. She said to him, How beautiful are your eyes, with which you have dazzled all the inhabitants of Egypt, men and women. He said to her, How beautiful they are while we are alive, but should you behold them in the grave, certainly you would move away from them. And she said to him, How beautiful and pleasing are all your words! Take now, I pray you, the harp which is in the house, and play with your hands, and let us hear your words. And he said to her, How beautiful and pleasing are my words when I speak the praise of my God and his glory. She said to him, How very beautiful is the hair of your head! Find the golden comb which is in my house, take it, I pray you, and curl the hair of your head. And he said to her, How long will you speak these words? Stop uttering these words to me, and rise and attend to your domestic affairs. And she said to him, There is no one in my house, and there is nothing to attend to but to your words and to your wish. Yet in spite of all this, she could not bring Joseph to her, neither did he place his eyes on her, but directed his eyes below to the ground. Zelicah desired Joseph in her heart, that he should lie with her. At the time that Joseph was sitting in the house doing his work, Zelicah came and sat before him, and she enticed him daily with her discourse to lie with her, or even to look at her, but Joseph would not listen to her. And she said to him, If you will not do according to my words, I will treat you with the punishment of death, and put an iron yoke on you. And Joseph said to her, Certainly God who created man loosens the fetters of prisoners, and it is he who will deliver me from your prison and from your judgment. When she could not persuade him, and her soul being still fixed on him, her desire threw her into a grave sickness. And all the women of Egypt came to visit her, and said to her, Why are you in this declining state? You lack nothing. Certainly your husband is a great and esteemed prince in the sight of the king. Should you lack anything of what your heart desires? Zelicah answered them, saying, This day it shall be made known to you from where this disorder comes which you see in me. And she commanded her maidservants to prepare food for all the women. She made a banquet for them, and all the women ate in the house of Zelicah. And she gave them knives to peel the citrons, to eat them. And she commanded that they should dress Joseph in costly garments, and he should appear before them. And Joseph came before their eyes, and all the women looked on Joseph, and could not take their eyes off him. They all cut their hands with the knives that they had in their hands, and all the citrons that were in their hands were filled with blood. And they knew not what they had done, but they continued to look at the beauty of Joseph, and did not turn their eyelids from him. Zelicah saw what they had done, and she said to them, What is this work that you have done? Look, I gave you citrons to eat, and you have all cut your hands. And all the women saw their hands, and truly they were full of blood, and their blood flowed down on their garments. They said to her, This slave in your house has overcome us, and we could not turn our eyelids from him on account of his beauty. She said to them, Certainly this happened to you in the moment that you looked at him, and you could not contain yourselves from him. How then can I refrain when he is constantly in my house, and I see him day after day going in and out of my house? How then can I keep from declining, or even from perishing on account of this? And they said to her, The words are true, for who can see this beautiful form in the house, and refrain from him? And is he not your slave and attendant in your house? And why do you not tell him that which is in your heart, but allow your soul to perish through this matter? And she said to them, I am daily endeavoring to persuade him, and he will not consent to my wishes. I promised everything that is good, and yet I could meet with no return from him. I am therefore in a declining state, as you see. Zelicah became very ill on account of her desire toward Joseph, and she was desperately lovesick on account of him. But all the people of the house of Zelicah and her husband knew nothing of this matter, that Zelicah was ill on account of her love to Joseph. All the people of her house asked her, saying, Why are you ill and declining, and lack nothing? And she said to them, I know not this thing which daily is increasing on me. All the women and her friends came daily to see her, and they spoke with her, and she said to them, This can only be through the love of Joseph. They said to her, Entice him and seize him secretly. Perhaps he may listen to you, and put off this death from you. And Zelicah became worse from her love to Joseph, and she continued to decline, till she scarcely had strength to stand. On a certain day Joseph was doing his master's work in the house, and Zelicah came secretly and fell suddenly on him. Joseph rose up against her, he was more powerful than she, and he brought her down to the ground. And Zelicah wept on account of the desire of her heart toward him, and she begged him with weeping, and her tears flowed down her cheeks. She spoke to him in a voice of pleading and in bitterness of soul, saying, Have you ever heard, seen, or known of so beautiful a woman as I am, or better than myself, who speaks daily to you, falls into a decline through love for you, confers all this honor on you, and still you will not listen to my voice? If it be through fear of your master that he will punish you, as the king lives, no harm shall come to you from your master through this thing. Now therefore do listen to me, and consent for the sake of the honor which I have conferred on you, and put off this death from me. For why should I die for your sake? And she ceased to speak. And Joseph answered her, saying, Keep away from me, and leave this matter to my master. Behold, my master knows not what there is with me in the house. For all that belongs to him he has delivered into my hands. And how shall I do these things in my master's house? For he has also greatly honored me in his house, and he has also made me overseer over his house, and he has exalted me, and there is no one greater in this house than I am, and my master has refrained nothing from me, excepting you who are his wife. How then can you speak these words to me, and how can I do this great evil and sin to God and to your husband? Now therefore keep away from me, and speak no more such words as these, for I will not listen to your words. But Zelicah would not listen to Joseph when he spoke these words to her. She daily enticed him to listen to her. It was after this that the brook of Egypt was filled above all its sides, and all the inhabitants of Egypt went forth, and also the king and princes went forth with timbrels and dances, for it was a great rejoicing in Egypt, and a holiday at the time of the overflow of the Sihor. And they went there to rejoice all the day. And when the Egyptians went out to the river to rejoice, as was their custom, all the people of the house of Potiphar went with them. But Zelicah would not go with them, for she said, I am unable to. She remained alone in the house, and no other person was with her in the house. And she rose up and ascended to her temple in the house, and dressed herself in princely garments, and she placed on her head precious stones of onyx stones, inlaid with silver and gold, and she beautified her face and skin with all sorts of women's purifying liquids. And she purified the temple and the house with cassia and frankincense, and she spread myrrh and aloes. Afterwards she sat in the entrance of the temple in the passage of the house, through which Joseph passed to do his work. And then Joseph came from the field and entered the house to do his master's work. He came to the place through which he had to pass, and saw all the works of Zelicah, and he turned back. Zelicah saw Joseph turning back from her. She called out to him, saying, What ails you, Joseph? Come to your work, and look, I will make room for you until you will have passed to your seat. And Joseph returned and came to the house, and passed from there to the place of his seat, and sat down to do his master's work as usual. And behold, Zelicah came to him, and stood before him in princely garments, and the scent from her clothes was spread some distance. She hurried and caught hold of Joseph and his garments, and said to him, As the king lives, if you will not perform my request, you shall die this day. And she hurried and stretched forth her other hand, and drew a sword from beneath her garments, and she placed it on Joseph's neck. She said, Rise and perform my request, and if not, you will die this day. Joseph was afraid of her doing this thing, and he rose up to flee from her. She seized the front of his garments, and in the terror of his flight, the garment which Zelicah seized was torn. Joseph left the garment in the hand of Zelicah, and he fled and got out, for he was afraid. When Zelicah saw that Joseph's garment was torn, and that he had left it in her hand and fled, she was afraid for her life, that the report should spread concerning her. She rose up and acted with cunning, and put off the garments in which she was dressed, and put on her other garments. She took Joseph's garment and laid it beside her. She went and seated herself in a place where she had sat in her illness, before the people of her house had gone out to the river. She called a young lad who was then in the house, and she ordered him to call the people of the house to her. And when she saw them, she said to them with a loud voice in lamentation, See what a Hebrew your master has brought to me in the house, for he came this day to lie with me. For when you had gone out, he came to the house, and seeing that there was no person in the house, he came to me and caught hold of me with intent to lie with me. And I seized his garments and tore them, and called out against him with a loud voice. And when I had lifted up my voice, he was afraid for his life, and left his garment before me and fled. The people of her house spoke nothing, but their wrath was very much set ablaze against Joseph. And they went to his master and told him the words of his wife. Potiphar came home enraged, and his wife cried out to him, saying, What is this thing you have done to me in bringing a Hebrew servant into my house? For he came to me this day to sport with me. Thus did he do to me this day. Potiphar heard the words of his wife, and ordered Joseph to be punished with severe stripes. And they did so to him. Of course, he's innocent, and he's getting severe stripes. It's just another reminder, symbolism of Jesus getting beat with stripes. Then he didn't deserve it. While they were smiting him, Joseph called out with a loud voice, and he lifted up his eyes to heaven. And he said, O Lord God, you know that I am innocent of all these things. Why shall I die this day through falsehood by the hands of these uncircumcised wicked men whom you know? And while Potiphar's men were beating Joseph, he continued to cry out and weep. And there was a child there 11 months old. And Yahweh opened the mouth of the child, and he spake these words before Potiphar's men who were smiting Joseph, saying, What do you want of this man, and why do you do this evil to him? My mother speaks falsely, and utters lies. Thus was the transaction. And the child told them accurately all that happened, and all the words of Zelicah to Joseph day after day did he relate to them. And all the men heard the words of the child, and they wondered greatly at the child's words. And the child ceased to speak and became still. Potiphar was very much ashamed at the words of his son, and he commanded his men not to beat Joseph any more, and the men ceased beating Joseph. Potiphar took Joseph and ordered him to be brought to justice before the priests, who were judges belonging to the king, in order to judge him concerning this affair. Potiphar and Joseph came before the priests who were the king's judges, and he said to them, "Decide, I beg you, what judgment is due to a servant, for thus has he done." And the priest said to Joseph, "Why did you do this thing to your master?" And Joseph answered them, saying, "Not so, my lords, thus was the matter." And Potiphar said to Joseph, "Certainly I entrusted in your hands all that belonged to me, and I withheld nothing from you but my wife. How could you do this evil?" And Joseph answered, saying, "Not so, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, my lord, the word which you did hear from your wife is untrue, and thus was the affair this day. A year had elapsed to me since I have come to your house. Have you seen any iniquity in me, or anything which might cause you to demand my life?" The priest said to Potiphar, "Send, we pray you, and let them bring before us Joseph's torn garment, and let us see the tear in it. And if it shall be that the tear is in front of the garment, then his face must have been opposite to her, and she must have caught hold of him to come to her. And with deceit did your wife do all that she has spoken." They brought Joseph's garment before the priests who were the judges, and they saw, and behold, the tear was in front of Joseph. And all the judging priests knew that she had pressed on him. And they said, "The judgment of death is not due to this slave, for he has done nothing. But his judgment is that he be placed in the prison house on account of the report which through him had gone forth against your wife." Potiphar heard the words, and he placed him in the prison house, the place where the king's prisoners are confined. And Joseph was in the house of confinement 12 years. And in spite of this, his master's wife did not turn from him, and she did not cease from speaking to him day after day to listen to her. And at the end of 3 months, Zelicah continued going to Joseph to the house of confinement day by day, and she enticed him to listen to her. And Zelicah said to Joseph, "How long will you remain in this house? But listen now to my voice, and I will bring you out of this house." And Joseph answered her, saying, "It is better for me to remain in this house than to listen to your words, to sin against God." She said to him, "If you will not perform my wish, I will pluck out your eyes, add fetters to your feet, and will deliver you into the hands of them whom you did not know before." Joseph answered her and said, "Behold, the God of the whole earth is able to deliver me from all that you can do to me, for he opens the eyes of the blind and loosens those that are bound and preserves all strangers who are unacquainted with the land." And when Zelicah was unable to persuade Joseph to listen to her, she ceased going to entice him. Joseph was still confined in the house of confinement, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, and all his brothers who were in the land of Canaan still mourned and wept in those days on account of Joseph. For Jacob refused to be comforted for his son Joseph, and Jacob cried aloud and wept and mourned all those days. This story reminds me of Jesus. Even when Jesus was not tempted by the devil, all the way up until, the trial and everything, he could have been tempted when they were, laughing at him, scoffing at him, mocking him for being on the cross when he was supposed to be the Son of God, and he could get himself down. And even then, the devil, Satan tempted him in the desert 2 times, saying, "If thou be the Son of God," just like God, said, "This is my son," when Jesus got baptized and also at his transfiguration. So 2 times God spoke and said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." 2 times Satan said, "If thou be the Son of God," when he was tempting him. Also, when Jesus was on the cross, people were saying, "If thou be the Son of God, come on down." So that's, another way that the devil was using them to tempt him to come down. And if Jesus had been tempted to come down, then, we wouldn't have been saved from him dying for us. So that's why it's important. And I think that, this really seems interesting to me, that even when Joseph was in prison, let's say like when Jesus was on the cross, all the way here, he'd, evaded the whole thing, and he's still getting tempted by the seductress. And I think this is interesting too in regards to the whore of Babylon. A lot of people are tempted to, give in, and we're not supposed to have anything to do with it. We're not supposed to even be looking at that sort of stuff. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and have a blessed day.